The Arizona sun beats down mercilessly as Jake Morrison clutches his nearly empty canteen. 3 days without water have left him delirious, his horse dead beneath the scorching sky. Just when death seems certain, he spots a small figure in the distance, a Native American girl barely breathing, abandoned in the dust. With only drops left in his canteen, Jake faces an impossible choice: save himself or risk everything for a stranger. What happens next will bring an entire Apache tribe to his doorstep and change the course of his life forever. Will Jake's single act of mercy spark a war or forge an unbreakable bond? Watch this incredible story of survival, sacrifice, and redemption that proves how one moment of humanity can echo through eternity. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more amazing true stories from the Wild West. The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly in every direction, a canvas of red rock and merciless sun that had claimed countless souls. Jake Morrison squinted through cracked lips at the horizon, his weathered hands trembling as he lifted the canteen to his ear. The pitiful slosh of liquid inside told him what he already knew. Maybe 2 mouthfuls left. 3, if he was lucky. His horse Dusty had collapsed that morning. The faithful mare who had carried him through 5 years of cattle drives and countless adventures now lay still beneath a makeshift shelter of sagebrush. Jake had spent the last of his strength digging her a shallow grave, knowing full well he might be joining her soon. "Should have listened to you about that shortcut, girl," he whispered to the wind, his voice barely a rasp. The Butterfield stage route would have added 2 days to his journey, but it would have meant water stations and the company of other travelers. Instead, his stubborn pride and a rumored silver strike had led him into this wasteland. The sun hung like a malevolent eye in the cloudless sky, and Jake knew he had maybe 6 hours before it would kill him. His shadow had shrunk to nothing beneath his boots, and the rocks around him radiated heat like the mouth of hell itself. He'd seen men die of thirst before. The delirium, the hallucinations, the way they'd claw at their own throats in the final moments. Jake stumbled forward, each step a monumental effort. His spurs clinked against the stones, a lonely sound in the vast silence. The leather of his boots was cracking, his clothes stiff with salt from his own sweat. Behind him, his tracks wove drunkenly across the hardpan, marking his descent into madness. That's when he saw her. At first, he thought it was another mirage. The heat had been playing tricks on him for hours, showing him lakes that weren't there, towns that vanished when he blinked. But this figure didn't shimmer and fade. A small form lay motionless near a cluster of barrel cacti, dark hair spread across the red earth like spilled ink. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached. It was a child, a Native American girl who couldn't be more than 12 years old. Her deerskin dress was torn and bloodstained, her lips cracked and blue. A terrible gash ran along her forehead, and her breathing came in shallow, desperate gasps. "Jesus," Jake breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. She'd been attacked, probably by raiders or wild animals, and left for dead. Her small hands were scraped raw, as if she'd crawled here from somewhere else, fighting for every inch. The girl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with fever. She tried to speak, but only a dry whisper emerged. Jake recognized a few words of Apache, water and help, but her voice was failing. He looked down at his canteen, then back at the dying child. The metal was warm in his hands, the liquid inside sloshing with each tremor of his exhausted body. 2 mouthfuls, maybe 3. Enough to buy him another few hours of life, to possibly reach the creek marked on his map 20 miles south. The girl's breathing grew more labored, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow pants. Her small fingers clawed weakly at the dirt, and Jake saw in her face the same desperation he'd felt when Dusty collapsed. The same fear, the same fight against the inevitable. He unscrewed the cap of his canteen with steady hands. The liquid inside was warm and tasted of metal and leather, but it was life itself. Jake tilted the girl's head gently, supporting her neck, and let the precious water flow between her parched lips. She swallowed reflexively, her body responding to the moisture, even as her consciousness faded. Jake gave her every drop, watching the last of his salvation disappear down her throat. When the canteen was empty, he set it aside and used his torn shirt to create shade over her small form. "There you go, little one," he whispered, his own voice growing weaker by the minute. "That's all I got, but maybe it's enough." The girl's breathing began to steady, her color improving slightly as the water worked its magic. Jake sat back on his heels, feeling the desert's heat beginning to claim him. His vision blurred at the edges, and he knew that his death was now certain. But as he looked down at the child's peaceful face, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a deep, abiding peace. The sun continued its relentless journey across the sky, and Jake Morrison prepared to meet his maker, knowing that his last act on earth had been one of mercy. Dawn came slowly to the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Jake Morrison's eyes opened to a world that seemed impossibly bright, his body screaming with the pain of dehydration and exposure. Every muscle felt like it had been beaten with hammers, and his tongue was swollen and useless in his mouth. But he was alive. The native girl lay beside him, her breathing steady and strong. Somehow, impossibly, they had both survived the night. Jake tried to sit up, his head spinning with the effort, and that's when he heard it, the sound of horses approaching at full gallop. Through the heat, shimmer rising from the desert floor, a group of riders emerged like phantoms. Apache warriors, their faces painted for war, their weapons glinting in the morning sun. Jake's heart sank as he counted them. At least 20 braves, all armed, all moving with deadly purpose. The lead rider was a man of perhaps 40 summers, his face a mask of controlled fury. Feathers adorned his long black hair, and the scars on his chest told stories of countless battles. His horse was a magnificent paint, and he rode with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. This was clearly a war chief, and his eyes burned with the fire of retribution. The warriors formed a circle around Jake and the girl, their horses snorting and pawing the ground. Several had arrows nocked and ready, while others held rifles with casual precision. Jake knew he was looking at his death, and he made peace with it. At least the child would be returned to her people. The war chief dismounted and approached the girl, his expression softening as he knelt beside her. He spoke rapid Apache, his voice thick with emotion, and Jake caught the word Ayana, which he knew meant eternal blossom. The chief's hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined the child's wounds, his warrior's facade cracking to reveal the love of a father. "She is my daughter," the chief said in heavily accented English, his dark eyes fixed on Jake. "Stolen by Comancheros 3 days past. We tracked them here." He gestured to the blood-stained earth. "Found their bodies over the ridge. Killed by wild animals, it seems. But my daughter, she was gone." Jake tried to speak, but his throat produced only a croak. The chief noticed his condition and barked an order in Apache. One of the younger warriors brought a water skin, and the chief himself helped Jake drink. The cool liquid was like salvation flowing down his parched throat. "Why?" the chief asked, his eyes searching Jake's face. "You are dying of thirst, yet you gave her your water. Why save the child of your enemy?" Jake found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. "She wasn't my enemy. She was just a child who needed help." The war chief studied him for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Around them, the other warriors waited in tense silence, their weapons still at the ready. The morning sun climbed higher, and Jake could see the questions in their eyes. Here was a white man, alone and dying, who had saved an Apache child. It challenged everything they knew about the world. "I am Chief Nalnish," the man said finally. "This is Ayana, my youngest daughter, the light of my heart." His voice grew thick with emotion. "The Comancheros took her to sell to slavers in Mexico. My warriors and I have ridden without rest to find her." Jake nodded weakly, understanding the chief's pain. "She's strong," he managed, "fought to live, crawled a long way to find shade." Chief Nalnish placed a gentle hand on his daughter's forehead, and she stirred, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw her father, tears began to flow down her cheeks. She spoke rapidly in Apache, pointing at Jake, her voice growing stronger with each word. The chief's expression changed as he listened to his daughter's account. His eyes widened with something that might have been awe or disbelief. He questioned her gently, and she responded with conviction, her small hands gesturing toward Jake's empty canteen. "She says you gave her water," Chief Nalnish said, his voice heavy with significance. "All your water, when you yourself were dying." "Seemed like the right thing to do," Jake whispered. The chief stood and walked to where Jake's canteen lay in the dust. He picked it up, examining it carefully, then tipped it over. Not a single drop fell from its mouth. He showed it to his warriors, speaking rapidly in Apache. Jake caught enough words to understand. The chief was explaining what had happened, how a dying cowboy had chosen to save the life of an Apache child rather than preserve his own. The warriors' expressions began to change. Hostile faces softened with confusion, then something approaching respect. One of the older braves dismounted and approached Jake, kneeling beside him. He placed his hand over his heart and spoke a single word, "Brother." Others followed suit, and soon Jake found himself surrounded by Apache warriors, offering water, food, and words of respect in their native tongue. Chief Nalnish returned to his side, his daughter now sitting up and drinking slowly from another water skin. "In our culture," the chief said quietly, "there is a concept called life debt. When someone saves the life of another at the cost of their own, it creates a bond that can never be broken. You have saved not just my daughter, but the future of my bloodline, the continuation of my people." Jake shook his head weakly. I couldn't let her die." "No," Chief Nalnish said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You could have. Any other man would have. But you chose mercy over survival. You chose her life over your own. This is not something my people will forget." As the sun climbed higher, Jake felt his strength beginning to return. The water and shade provided by the Apache had pulled him back from death's door, just as his sacrifice had saved young Ayana. But he sensed that this was only the beginning of something much larger, a ripple that would spread far beyond this desert encounter. The war chief helped Jake to his feet, supporting him with surprising gentleness. "You will come with us," he said. "Rest, recover, and then we will talk about what this means for both our peoples." 3 days later, Jake Morrison found himself in a place no white man had seen and lived to tell about it, the hidden stronghold of Chief Nalnish's Apache band. Nestled in a box canyon, whose entrance was concealed by fallen boulders and desert scrub, the village was a testament to the Apache's ability to thrive in the harshest environment on Earth. Wickiups dotted the canyon floor, their brush and hide coverings blending seamlessly with the landscape. Children played in the shadows of towering red rocks, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Women tended fires and worked on crafts, their movements graceful and purposeful. It was a scene of peace that stood in stark contrast to the violent reputation of the Apache people. Jake had been given a place of honor near the chief's lodge, and his recovery had been watched over by the tribe's medicine man, an ancient Apache named Goyathle, who spoke broken English and possessed an encyclopedia of desert survival knowledge. Under his care, Jake's strength had returned quickly, aided by jerky made from desert bighorn sheep and a tea brewed from local plants. But it was the attention of young Ayana that truly marked Jake's special status. The girl had recovered completely from her ordeal, and she followed him everywhere, chattering in a mixture of Apache and broken English, teaching him words and phrases while learning his language in return. Her presence seemed to put the entire tribe at ease around this strange white visitor. "Today, Council Fire," Chief Nalnish announced, approaching Jake as the sun began its descent toward the canyon rim. "My war leaders wish to hear your story from your own lips, and to discuss what comes next." Jake felt a chill despite the desert heat. He'd been treated well, but he understood his situation. He was deep in Apache territory, a potential source of information about military movements and white settlements. The fact that he'd saved Ayana had bought him time and respect, but it might not be enough to guarantee his freedom. As darkness fell, a large fire was built in the center of the village. Warriors gathered in a circle, their faces painted with ceremonial designs, their weapons close at hand. Jake was given a place beside Chief Nalnish, while Ayana sat cross-legged nearby, translating when the conversation moved too quickly into Apache. The council began with the smoking of a sacred pipe, passed from warrior to warrior in solemn ceremony. When it reached Jake, he hesitated, knowing that to partake would be to participate in their rituals, to show respect for their ways. Chief Nalnish nodded encouragingly, and Jake drew a small puff, feeling the harsh smoke burn his throat. "Tell them," Chief Nalnish said quietly, "how you came to be in the desert that day." Jake spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. He told them about his journey, about Dusty's death, about the terrible choice he'd faced when he found Ayana. As Ayana translated, Jake watched the warriors' faces, seeing skepticism gradually give way to something else, a grudging respect that seemed to surprise them as much as it did him. When he finished, an older warrior named Kochise, not the famous chief, but named in his honor, stood to speak. His words were rapid and passionate, and Jake caught enough to understand that he was questioning Jake's motives. Why should they trust a white man? How did they know this wasn't some elaborate trick? Other voices joined in, some supportive, others suspicious. The debate grew heated, with warriors standing to gesture and argue. Jake felt the mood of the council shifting like desert sand, and he began to fear for his life. Then Chief Nalnish raised his hand for silence. "There is something you do not know," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Something my daughter told me, but which I have kept to myself until now." He placed his hand on Ayana's shoulder, encouraging her to stand. She looked nervous but determined as she began to speak in Apache, her young voice clear and strong. Jake watched the warriors' faces change as she talked, saw them lean forward with increasing amazement. "My daughter says," Chief Nalnish translated slowly, "that when the cowboy gave her water, he spoke to her, not in words she could understand, but in the way of the heart. She felt his kindness, his sacrifice, but more than this, she saw his spirit." The chief paused, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Among my people, some are born with the gift of sight. They can see the true nature of a person's soul, the color of their intentions. My daughter has had this gift since she was very small. She has never been wrong." Ayana continued speaking, her words growing more confident. Jake found himself holding his breath, not knowing what she was saying but sensing its importance. "She says your spirit shines like silver water," Chief Nalnish continued, "pure and clear, with no darkness hiding within. She says you would die before you would betray a trust, that you would protect the innocent even if it cost you everything. She says you have the heart of a true warrior, though you may not know it yourself." A murmur ran through the gathered warriors, and Jake saw their expressions soften. In Apache culture, he was beginning to understand the gift of spiritual sight was taken very seriously. If Ayana said his spirit was pure, then it was accepted as fact. But it was what happened next that truly changed everything. A young warrior Jake hadn't seen before came running into the firelight, his horse lathered with sweat. He spoke rapidly to Chief Nalnish, whose face grew dark with anger and concern. "What is it?" Jake asked. "Trouble," the chief replied grimly. "Colonel Whitman's cavalry has been attacking Apache camps to the south. 3 villages burned, many dead. They are moving north toward us. My scouts say they will be here in 2 days, maybe less." The council erupted in angry voices, warriors arguing about whether to fight or flee. Jake listened to the debate, understanding enough to know that the tribe was split. Some wanted to stand and fight, others to disappear deeper into the desert. It was a conflict with no good answers: fight and face superior numbers and firepower, or run and risk being tracked down anyway. "There is another way," Jake said quietly, and the council fell silent. Chief Nalnish looked at him with interest. "Speak." Jake stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. "I know Colonel Whitman. Served under him in the war. He's not a bad man, just convinced that all Apache are his enemies. If someone could talk to him, explain what happened here." "You would go back to your people?" Cochise asked suspiciously. "Tell them where we are hidden." "No," Jake said firmly. "I would go to prevent a massacre on both sides." He looked around the circle of warriors, men who had accepted him despite every reason not to. "You saved my life. Let me try to save yours." Chief Nalnish studied him for a long moment. "And if Colonel Whitman does not listen? If he thinks you have been, what is the word, corrupted by us?" Jake smiled grimly. "Then I guess we'll find out how good Apache warriors really are." The debate that followed lasted until nearly dawn. But when the sun rose over the canyon rim, Jake Morrison was riding out of the hidden stronghold, carrying with him a message of peace and the hopes of an entire Apache band. Behind him, young Ayana watched from the canyon rim, her gift telling her that this strange cowboy with the silver spirit might just be the key to preventing a war. The dust cloud on the horizon told Jake Morrison that he was running out of time. Colonel Whitman's cavalry was moving faster than expected, their blue uniforms a harsh contrast against the red rocks of the Arizona Territory. Jake spurred his borrowed Apache pony harder, knowing that every minute counted now. Behind him, hidden in their canyon stronghold, Chief Nalnish's people were preparing for war, or annihilation. Jake had ridden through the night, following game trails and Apache paths that would have been invisible to white eyes. But his time with the tribe had taught him to read the desert's subtle signs, and he'd made good time despite the treacherous terrain. Now, as the sun climbed toward its zenith, he could see the cavalry column stretching across the desert floor like a blue snake. He recognized Colonel Whitman's guidon immediately, the same flag he'd followed through Tennessee and Georgia during the war between the states. James Whitman had been a good officer then, fair and honorable, but the frontier had a way of changing men. Too many ambushes, too many dead soldiers, too much hatred on both sides. Jake rode directly toward the column's head, his hands raised high to show he carried no weapons. The point riders spotted him quickly, their carbines coming up with practiced efficiency. He heard shouted orders, saw the column begin to deploy into fighting formation. "I need to speak with Colonel Whitman," Jake called out as the troopers surrounded him. "It's important." The sergeant in charge of the point detail was a grizzled veteran with suspicious eyes. "You'll speak to whoever we say you'll speak to, mister. What's your business out here?" "My name's Jake Morrison. I served with the colonel during the war. Tell him I need 5 minutes, no more." The sergeant studied him carefully, taking in his weathered appearance, his Apache-made clothing, and the obviously Indian pony he rode. "You been living with the hostiles?" "I've been living with people," Jake said firmly, "and I'm here to prevent a massacre." Word was passed back through the column, and within minutes, Jake found himself face to face with Colonel James Whitman. The years had not been kind to his former commanding officer. Whitman's hair had gone completely gray, his face lined with the stress of frontier duty. His blue eyes, once warm with good humor, now held the cold calculation of a man who had seen too much death. "Jake Morrison," Whitman said, his voice carefully neutral, "I heard you'd gone native. Heard you were living with the Apache somewhere up north. Sir, I need to tell you something. There's a peaceful band holed up about 10 miles from here, women and children mostly. They're not the ones who've been raiding." Whitman's expression hardened. "Apache are Apache, Jake. I've got 23 dead troopers who disagree with you about peaceful if they could still talk. Colonel, please just listen for 1 minute." Jake's voice carried an urgency that made Whitman pause. 3 days ago, I was dying of thirst in the desert. Found a Apache girl, couldn't have been more than 12 years old. She'd been taken by Comancheros, escaped somehow. I gave her my last water. Your point. Her father is Chief Nalnish. When he found us, he could have killed me on the spot. Instead, he saved my life, brought me to his village. I've seen these people, Colonel. They're not raiders. They're families, just trying to survive. Whitman's aide, a young lieutenant with eager eyes, leaned forward. "Sir, it could be a trap. They could have sent him to mislead us." "Could be," Whitman agreed. "Jake, you've got to understand my position. I've got orders to clear this territory of hostile Apache. Every band I let slip away could mean more dead settlers, more raids." Jake felt desperation clawing at his chest. In the distance, he could see dust rising from the canyon where Chief Nalnish's people were hidden. If they chose to run, they might escape temporarily, but Whitman would track them. If they chose to fight, it would be suicide. "Sir, what if I could prove they're not hostile? What if there was a way to show you their true intentions?" "How?" Jake took a deep breath, knowing he was about to risk everything on a single, desperate gamble. "Let me go back to them. Give me 2 hours. I'll convince them to come out to meet with you under a flag of truce. If they do that, if they're willing to talk peace, will you at least listen?" Colonel Whitman was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands resting on his saddle horn. Around them, the cavalry waited in tense silence, sweat running down their faces in the desert heat. 2 hours, Whitman said finally. "But Jake, if this is a trick, if they come out shooting, I'll hold you responsible. Understood?" "Understood, sir." Jake was turning his pony to ride back toward the canyon when a commotion broke out in the rear of the column. Shouts and the sound of hoofbeats caused every head to turn, and Jake's heart nearly stopped at what he saw. Chief Nalnish was riding toward them at full gallop, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came the entire Apache band, men, women, and children, all mounted and moving with purpose. But instead of weapons, they carried something else entirely: white flags. Dozens of them, fashioned from torn shirts and strips of cloth, held high on poles and rifle barrels and even children's sticks. The entire Apache band was approaching under a massive display of peaceful intention. "Hold your fire," Colonel Whitman shouted, his voice carrying clearly across the desert. "Nobody shoots unless I give the order." Chief Nalnish rode directly to where Jake waited beside the colonel. His face was painted not for war but for ceremony, and his expression was calm and dignified. Behind him, Jake could see Ayana riding beside an older woman who must be her mother, her young face bright with trust and hope. "Colonel Whitman," Chief Nalnish said in carefully pronounced English, "I am Nalnish of the Apache. This man," he gestured toward Jake, "says you are a warrior of honor, like himself. I come to speak of peace between our peoples." Whitman looked stunned. "You speak English? I speak the tongue of my enemies so I may know their hearts," the chief replied, "but I hope today to speak the tongue of friends." What followed was unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. There, in the middle of the Arizona desert, two groups of armed men who had spent years killing each other sat down to talk. Chief Nalnish spoke of his people's desire for peace, of their willingness to settle on reservation land if it meant safety for their children. Colonel Whitman listened, his expression gradually softening as he heard the chief's words. It was young Ayana who provided the moment that changed everything. She rode forward, unafraid, and handed Colonel Whitman a small object, Jake's empty canteen, polished until it gleamed like silver in the desert sun. "She says to tell you," Chief Nalnish translated, "that this belonged to the man who chose her life over his own. She says it is the most precious thing she owns, because it reminds her that there is good in all peoples if we choose to see it." Colonel Whitman held the canteen in his hands, understanding its significance without needing explanation. He looked at Jake, then at Chief Nalnish, then at the faces of the Apache people who had risked everything on the hope that peace was possible. "I'll need to send word to Washington," he said finally. "But I think we can work something out." As the sun set over the Arizona territory that day, two peoples who had been enemies began the long process of becoming something else. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, misunderstandings, and those on both sides who preferred war to peace. But it was a beginning. Jake Morrison watched the negotiations continue as darkness fell, marveling at how a single act of compassion could ripple outward to change the world. Chief Nalnish caught his eye and nodded, a gesture of respect between warriors who had chosen mercy over vengeance. And somewhere in the growing darkness, a young Apache girl named Ayana looked up at the stars and smiled, knowing that her gift had shown her true. The silver-spirited cowboy had saved more than just her life. He had saved the future itself. The last drop of water had become a river of hope, flowing across the desert toward a new dawn.